All right, everybody, hello and welcome to our next topic, which is validity. So validity is taken together with reliability. So we talked about reliability in our last topic. And if you haven't already seen that lecture, go ahead and start there because we take reliability and validity together. But we talk about reliability first because we can't have validity without reliability. So we like to start there. So we start off here with just remembering reliability. All right, what is it? Reliability is consistency. We talked about consistency in a few different forms. We're concerned with consistency within our measures, as well as consistency across things like forms of measurement. But in order for a test to be truly valid, which we're going to talk about here today, it must also be reliable. So I like this comic here. It says, "Don't worry, I've done this hundreds of times." And then it says experience can just mean making the same mistake with increasing confidence. So you can make the same mistake again and again and have it come out consistently, but it doesn't mean that your findings are valid. And we have consistency as to reliability, as we have accuracy to validity. All right, so a synonym for validity is accuracy. Validity is the extent to which a measure assesses what it is claimed to measure. All right, we're measuring what we think we're measuring. This sort of circles back to long ago when we talked about operational definitions. Whatever you define in your study, you want to make sure that that's what you are actually measuring. If we take something like happiness, measuring happiness, if you're looking at, say, exercise and happiness, is very different than assessing happiness in terms of mood. If we're looking at mood disorders, that sort of thing. So that sort of segues into this last piece here. All of this is contextual validity. It depends on context. So valid for what we're trying to measure, right? To make sure that we have clear operational definitions, that we have a clear research question, so we know what type of accuracy we're looking for in these different phenomena. All right, so more target analogies. All right, we had a couple of these back in reliability, but here we are, all right, this is to illustrate the idea between reliability and validity. So we can have a test be reliable, but not valid. Think a scale that's 10 pounds off, right? Every time you step on it, it'll give you your weight plus 10 pounds. Well, that's reliable, it's consistent, but it's not valid. So it's not accurate to what we're trying to measure. We can have validity, but no reliability, meaning that we can be close to hitting our target, but just inconsistently. But what we're really aiming for here is both. We want to be both consistent and accurate, both reliable and valid in our claims. So we have a few different types of validity, and that's what we'll spend most of the rest of this lecture talking about. And we have lots of different types of validity. So I'll apologize ahead of time. We have a lot of terms this time around, a lot of definitions of all these different types of validity. But they all stand on their own. There's a reason that we have so many types of validity, much like we have different types of reliability to assess our measures. So we'll start out with a fairly simple one, which is face validity. Face validity asks, from the appearance of a question or an item on your measure, does it appear to measure what it claims to measure? Or how transparent is a question, right? Is it a straightforward question, or is it getting at something a little bit different than, what the question is leading on? So if we have a simple question like, I feel bad today, that's a very vague question. There doesn't seem to be anything hidden here in this question, right? It's very clear. What's being asked, face validity, is also a little bit related to deception that we talked about back in ethics. When we're using deception, remember deception is sometimes a good thing, even though it sounds bad. And we can basically manipulate people, again, a word that sounds bad but can be used for good. We can manipulate people into thinking that they're answering questions on one thing, when in fact they're answering questions about something else. All right, so face validity is just how transparent is a question, how obvious is it, what's being asked, how obvious are the contents of measure. That's our face validity. Okay, so now we're going to talk about two major branches of validity. So much like in reliability, we had internal reliability or internal consistency. We have internal validity as well as external validity. So includes within this internal validity includes within the study or within the experiment the accuracy of the measures. So we have a little clip art Michael Jackson here explaining to us internal validity. But did the experiment measure what it set out to do within the confines of the experiment? Did you measure what you intended to measure accurately? Then we have external validity, which is a little bit different. External validity has to do with generalization or inferences. It asks if we can interpret the findings to be applied to other situations outside of our specific study or our specific experiment. Remember that this is the heart of statistics, really, is the inferential testing, that if we conduct a study on a group of individuals, we want to be able to generalize those findings to other people. So that's what external validity is all about. Are our results accurate enough to make inferences about other groups of people? Internal validity is where we accurately measuring what we set out to measure within our experiment, right, without looking externally. All right, so next we have a type of validity that's relatively straightforward as well. We have content validity. So content validity has to do with the coverage of a measure. If you're saying that you're measuring, say for this example, arithmetic skills, you would want to make sure that you've covered all elements of arithmetic. If we take this a little further and say we want to evaluate life satisfaction in individuals, we would have to get multiple facets of life satisfaction, right? Rather than just asking one question on life satisfaction. Maybe we want to ask how satisfied someone is with their career, with their relationships, with their family, with their social life, right? Social satisfaction. And the list could go on and on and on, right? We would want to make sure that we're covering all of the content that would be considered life satisfaction. Now we're under concurrent validity. These are where they start to get a little bit more complex in terms of what they mean in terms of accuracy. So here, concurrent validity asks, does a scale correlate well with other measures of the same concept taken at the same time? All right, so let's unpack that a little bit. Let's say that I wanted to create my own depression inventory. I want to create a scale that accurately measures depression or depressive symptoms. So I could create a scale. I could use questions that I think get at depression. I could put it all together and to, make sure that it's valid, to make sure that it's accurate. What I could do is I could give it to somebody after they take, say, the Beck Depression Inventory, which is a valid measure for depression, or at least the most valid that we have. I could have the same person take these concurrently, right? Taking a measure on the same concept at the same time, and we could go ahead and take a look at the results. Do they correlate well? We would expect there to be a very strong correlation between these two things if they're supposedly measuring the same thing. So this happens a lot in psychology. We have lots of reasons to create new scales to measure what we're setting out to measure. Say that my goal is to make a depression inventory that's even shorter than the BDI, the Beck Depression Inventory, that takes less time to complete. If it correlates very well or almost perfectly with the BDI, then we have a more concise measure. So concurrent validity is a way in which we can assess for accuracy of different measures. So as promised, we're delivering a long list of names, a long list of types of validity. So here's another. We have predictive validity, which is a lot like it sounds. How accurately can we predict using a measure, right? So we have a survey instrument and then a future outcome or any type of measure in a future outcome. And we want to correlate what was given on that measure and what the actual outcome was, right? So maybe we're taking a survey to assess for, let's say, academic success, right? We ask people how academically successful they are, how successful they feel they are. And then maybe we go look after college graduation, right? If we're assessing college students, maybe we took a look at the future outcome. How much did our survey predict their actual academic success? career success. So of course we want predictive power in all of our statistics, but specifically we want to be able to accurately predict. So we've been talking about this all along, but this is the system that we can use to do this. We can compare our initial data collection to future outcomes to see how well we were able to predict at the time of our study, what's going to happen, the future. All right, so we have something called construct validity. We're actually going to talk about this in two parts. So construct validity is how well we understand a concept or a construct and how well we cover that construct with our measure. So this is a little bit vague because this will differ dramatically based on the type of variable or concept or measure that you're looking to understand. But we want to make sure that we have a thorough theoretical and conceptual understanding of the topics that we're trying to investigate. So we have two different ways that we assess construct validity, two sort of opposing ways. We look for convergence in our validity and discrimination between our validity. So we're looking for likenesses and unlikenesses across different measures. So let me show you what I mean here. When we're talking about something like convergent validity, we want to know where our topics converge, right? Where they meet with each other. So if we have different sorts of measures measuring the same general concept, we would expect some intercorrelation. For example, here we have what we would call a latent variable, right? We've maybe talked about latent variables once before. But a latent variable is something in multivariate statistics where we have an understanding that a single variable, let's take self-esteem, might be comprised of other variables, right? So feeding into self-esteem, we might have self-worth, confidence, social skills, and self-appraisal. We would want to take a look at all of these things in unison, right? We want to take a look at how well all of these things correlate with each other. If we're trying to measure self-esteem, we can go ahead and try and correlate our self-esteem measure with all of these different submeasures and see where the relationships are. So the question is really, do different sorts of measures of the same concept tend to intercorrelate? And they should, right? If we have evidence of them being convergent in the past, they should still intercorrelate. All right, so then lastly, here we have discriminant validity, which is really just the conceptual opposite of what we just discussed. Do measures of apparently different concepts not correlate with each other? So if we have two concepts that are meant to be separate, but maybe are similar in general idea, we want to make sure that statistically they're not similar. They're not overlapping in terms of response. So we'll stick with self-esteem here as a general idea. So maybe we have self-esteem and we want to compare it to locus of control. Maybe you've probably heard of locus of control. This is an interesting personality variable. We have two types of locus of control, internal and external. And internal locus of control means that you feel in control of your life, that you can make decisions that are impactful. Where an external locus of control is someone who believes that things happen to them externally and they have little control over the events of their life. So if the science dictates that self-esteem and locus of control are different from each other, right? Not related. If you set out to measure these things and you correlate them, you should expect weak correlations. Remember, our correlations range from -1 to +1. So if we have these very weak correlations like 0.12, 0.09, 0.05, we can say with some confidence that these things are not correlated, that they're not interrelated. We can do this in other cases as well, right? We want to make sure that we have discrimination between two topics that are not meant to be completely overlapping, right? Even if there's a little overlap, that's okay. Remember that we do have kind of a spectrum of interpretation of correlations. Anything less than about 0.3 we'll consider weak, and that's what we would look for here. So we're through our mad dash of lots of different types of validity. Again, there's a lot of vocabulary here, but thankfully most of these terms kind of point directly to their name, right? We have content validity, we have convergent, right? Think of things coming together, converging to predict accuracy. So I know we have a long list here, but hopefully they were clear. Hopefully we understand the importance of the relationship between validity and reliability. So thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you on our next lecture.